The letter arrived on a Tuesday, water-stained and smelling faintly of lavender. Nathaniel Reed sat by the window of his small log cabin in the Montana Territory, the paper trembling in his rough hands. The year was 1883, and the spring wind carried the last bite of winter through the cracks in the walls. Nathaniel had lived alone for 8 long years, and silence had become his closest companion. But that letter, it carried something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It had been 2 months since he'd written to the mail order, bride service in a moment of weakness after a brutal winter. He hadn't expected a reply. Yet here it was saying that Miss Zoe Caldwell of Boston would arrive in Silverdale on the last Thursday of May, 3 days from now. Nathaniel read the words again and again, his heart thudding in a way it hadn't in years. What if she regretted coming? What if she saw him? Just a worn-out cowboy with nothing but a cabin and a few acres, and turned right around. He muttered to himself, "What have I gone and done?" Quote, the next days passed in a blur. Nathaniel cleaned every inch of the cabin until his knuckles bled. He washed the curtains, swept the floor, and even tried baking bread, though it came out hard as a horseshoe. He borrowed a spare mattress from the general store and aired it out for her. By Wednesday night, he stood before his cracked mirror, trimming his beard and cutting his hair with a knife. The man who stared back was sun-worn with deep lines around his blue eyes. Not handsome, maybe, but decent. He hoped that would be enough. Thursday dawned bright and clear. Nathaniel dressed in his cleanest shirt and trousers, pulled on his good boots, and rode the 7 miles into Silverdale. The small town was a line of dust and wooden buildings, a saloon, a church, a general store, and a few scattered homes. He tied his horse outside the stagecoach office, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Frank Wilson, who ran the stage line, greeted him with a grin. "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride coming in. News travels fast," Nathaniel muttered. "Brave woman," Frank said with a half-smile, and Nathaniel couldn't tell if it was a joke or not. The coach was late as usual. Nathaniel paced the platform, hat twisting in his hands, every muscle in his body tight. He thought about turning back, sending a letter later saying he changed his mind. But just as he was about to leave, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. The stagecoach rumbled into town, the horses snorting and stomping as it came to a stop. The driver jumped down, tossing a small trunk on. The platform then helped a woman step down. Nathaniel froze. She was small and slender, wearing a travel-stained blue dress and a simple hat with a veil. She stood still, clutching her bag, eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone. Nathaniel took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Miss Caldwell?" He asked, his voice rough. The woman turned slowly. She lifted her veil. Nathaniel's stomach clenched. Beneath it was a face that might have been beautiful, delicate, pale, with eyes the color of spring grass, but marked by a dark bruise spreading across her cheek and a healing cut on her lip. "Yes," she said quietly. "Mr. Reed?" He nodded, unable to take his eyes off her injuries. She noticed his stare and lifted a trembling hand to her cheek. "I can explain," she whispered, fumbling inside her handbag. She pulled out a folded note and held it toward him. "You may wish to reconsider our arrangement." Nathaniel unfolded the paper. The handwriting was careful and neat. "Dear Mr. Reed, the woman who arrives may not be what you expected. Miss Caldwell has suffered at the hands of those who should have protected her. She comes to you in need of safety more than marriage, should you wish to end the arrangement. Agency will refund your fee in full. The director, Western Bride Agency." Nathaniel lowered the letter. Zoe stood before him, eyes downcast as still as a frightened deer. "Who did this to you?" he asked, voice low. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "I'm here, but I understand if you wish to dissolve our agreement." Nathaniel looked at her, really looked. The bruises couldn't hide the strength in her eyes or the faint tremor of hope in her voice. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He handed the letter back. "Miss Caldwell," he said, steady and sure. You're not alone now. She blinked, surprise flickering across her face. You still want me as your bride. I want you to be safe, Nathaniel said simply. The rest can wait. Her shoulders eased and she let out a small shaky breath. Thank you, she said softly. Nathaniel, he corrected. Zoe, she replied, her lips curving faintly despite the bruise. Nathaniel picked up her trunk and nodded toward his horse. My homestead, about 7 miles from here. Would you rather rest in town first? Zoe glanced nervously at the few townsfolk watching them. I'd rather not stay. Then we'll head home, Nathaniel said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. He helped her mount the horse, careful not to touch her more than necessary, then climbed up behind her. The trail was rough and silent. Nathaniel could feel the stiffness in her back, the tension of someone used to flinching at any sudden move. As they reached the ridge overlooking his valley, he pointed. There it is. Below lay a sturdy log cabin beside a clear creek, a small barn and a young garden just beginning to sprout. It's not much, he said. It's lovely, she replied, and he thought maybe she meant it. Inside, Nathaniel showed her the spare room, a simple bed, a small chest, a single window. You'll have your own space. I know it's plain. It's perfect, she said quickly. She turned, her eyes meeting his. Mr. Reed, Nathaniel, I came here because I had nowhere else. The agency helped me when no one else would. I don't expect anything you're not willing to give. Nathaniel nodded, and I'll say this, whatever happened before, it won't happen here. You're safe now. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Thank you. I'm not used to kindness from men. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. You'll get used to it. Quote, that night, after a quiet supper, Zoe retired to her small room. Nathaniel lay awake across the cabin, listening to the soft creak of the mattress and the faint sound of her breathing. For the first time in years, his cabin wasn't silent. The loneliness that had haunted him for so long had been replaced by something new, something fragile and uncertain. But alive, he stared at the ceiling, wondering what fate had brought a bruised, frightened woman from Boston to his lonely stretch of Montana wilderness. He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. His life of solitude had ended the moment she lifted her veil, and as sleep finally claimed him. Nathaniel Reed whispered the promise again in his heart. She's not alone now. Morning sunlight spilled through the cracks in the shutters, warming the wooden floor of the cabin. Nathaniel woke to the smell of coffee and something frying. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of a quiet voice. He rose, pulled on his boots, and stepped into the main room. Zoe stood at the stove, her back to him, her long hair braided neatly down her back. The bruise on her cheek was still dark, but in the morning light, she looked more alive than the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach the day before. She turned when she heard him, offering a small, uncertain smile. I hope you don't mind, she said. I found some eggs by the door and thought I'd make breakfast. Nathaniel shook his head. I don't mind one bit. You didn't have to cook, though. I want to earn my keep, she replied quietly. I can cook, clean, sew, and help in the garden. I'm stronger than I look. He studied her face, the faint determination there. You don't need to prove anything to me, Zoe. Her lips pressed together. Maybe not to you, but I need to prove it to myself. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Fair enough, but take it easy. Today, get your bearings. There's plenty of time to work later. They ate together at the small wooden table, the first shared meal Nathaniel had eaten with another person in years. The eggs were perfectly cooked, and the bread, his hard, uneven loaf, tasted better somehow with her across from him. They spoke little, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, just quiet. After breakfast, Nathaniel showed her around the homestead, the creek that ran past the cabin, the vegetable garden, the barn where his milk cow and a few chickens lived. Zoe listened intently as he talked, her questions thoughtful, her eyes taking in everything. I grew up on a small farm in Vermont, she said when he mentioned his garden, before my parents died, and I went to live with my uncle in Boston. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly at the mention of her uncle. And Nathaniel didn't press. "You'll find it's hard work here," he said instead, "but honest work. The land can be cruel, but it gives back if you're patient. I think I'd rather face the land than people," Zoe said softly. "People can be far crueler." Nathaniel looked at her, then really looked. The way her hands tightened around her shawl, the shadow that crossed her face when she spoke of her past. He recognized that kind of hurt, the kind that didn't heal quickly. "You won't have to face either alone," he said. For the first time, she smiled. Not polite, not forced, but real. "Thank you, Nathaniel." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Nathaniel worked the fields and tended to the animals while Zoe took over the house. Within a week, the cabin looked warmer, more lived in. She added small touches, wild flowers in jars, clean linens, curtains made from a piece of fabric she'd brought in her trunk. Nathaniel hadn't realized how empty the place had felt until she filled it with life. Zoe proved herself capable and hardworking. She woke early, milked the cow, collected eggs, and kept the cabin spotless. She laughed softly when Nathaniel burned his hand on a coffee pot, and the sound of that laughter stayed with him all day. Her bruises began to fade, replaced by a natural glow from the Montana sun, but her eyes still carried a weariness he couldn't ignore. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Zoe broke the silence. "I suppose I should tell you the truth about what happened in Boston." Nathaniel looked up from the whittling knife in his hand, giving her his full attention. She stared into the flames as she spoke. "My parents died when I was 16. My uncle took me in. At first, I thought he was doing me a kindness. But as I grew older, things changed. He began treating me like property, not family. When I turned 21 this spring, he decided to marry me off to one of his business partners, a man old enough to be my father. When I refused, her voice faltered, and she touched her cheek. He made sure I understood what disobedience would cost." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He did that, too." Zoe nodded. "It wasn't the first time I ran away that night. I went to the Western Bride Agency because I had nowhere else to go. The woman there, Miss Ellis, helped me leave Boston. She said I'd be safe out west. She told me you were a good man." Nathaniel swallowed hard, anger and sorrow wearing inside him. "She was right about one thing," he said. "You are safe here." Quote. Zoe's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe that." Over the next weeks, something unspoken began to grow between them. Trust, perhaps, respect, maybe something deeper neither dared to name. Nathaniel found himself looking forward to the quiet evenings they spent talking by the fire. Zoe began to laugh more, to hum softly while she worked. Her smile came easier. One afternoon, Nathaniel came in from the fields to find her standing barefoot in the garden, the wind lifting her hair. For a moment, he just watched her, the woman who had arrived bruised and afraid, now moving freely beneath the open sky. When she turned and caught him looking, she flushed but didn't look away. "It's beautiful here," she said. So open and free. He nodded, his throat tight. "It can be lonely sometimes. I've had enough of people for a while," she said. "Loneliness doesn't scare me anymore." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Well, you've got me to deal with now," she smiled back. "I think I can manage that." Quote, summer came to Montana in a rush of green. The garden flourished under Zoe's care, and Nathaniel found himself working harder than ever, not because he had to, but because life finally seemed to have meaning. The cabin that had once echoed with silence now rang with laughter and conversation. But one evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zoe grew quiet. She looked at the horizon for a long time before speaking. "I keep thinking about what comes next," she said softly, "about what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Nathaniel said. I do, she insisted. You took me in when no one else would. You gave me safety, a home, but the letter, it said I came here to be your wife. Nathaniel looked out over the fading light. That paper's still sitting in my desk, unsigned. He said, well, sign it when you're ready, not before. Zoe turned to him, her green eyes shining in the dusk. And if I'm never ready, then I'll still be here, he said simply. You don't need to earn your place here, Zoe. You already have. For a long time, neither spoke. The crickets sang, and the stars began to appear. Finally, Zoe whispered, thank you, Nathaniel. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The peace of the evening said it all. But in the weeks to come, that peace would be tested by something neither of them expected. Because ghosts from Zoe's past had a way of finding what they wanted, even across 1,000 miles of wild land. And when they came, Nathaniel Reed would have to decide just how far he was willing to go to keep his promise. She wasn't alone now, and he would make sure she never would be again. The sun beat down on the small town of Silverdale as Nathaniel and Zoe rode in together for the first time in months. The summer air, shimmered with heat and dust, rose from the street beneath the horses' hooves. Zoe sat straight in front of him, her hands gripping the saddle horn, her back pressed lightly against his chest. For a moment Nathaniel thought of how far they'd come, of the frightened woman stepping off the stagecoach, and the quiet strength she carried. Now they needed supplies for winter. Flour, sugar, coffee. Zoe had insisted on coming. I can't hide forever, she'd said that morning. He had agreed, though he didn't like the idea of her being stared at by curious eyes. At the general store, they were greeted by the storekeeper Jenkins, a round man with a curious smile. Well, if it isn't Reed and his mystery bride, he said, we've been wondering when you two might show yourselves. Zoe's chin lifted slightly. It's Zoe Caldwell, she said with quiet confidence. We're taking time to know each other before making everything official. Jenkins blinked, then chuckled. Sensible approach, I suppose. He leaned closer. Still, you'll be talk of the town for sure. Zoe didn't flinch, didn't hide behind Nathaniel. Instead, she asked about the price of sugar and discussed the harvest like someone who'd lived there her whole life. Nathaniel watched her with pride, realizing she was no longer the same woman who had stepped off that dusty coach months ago. After their errands, they stopped at the small restaurant for lunch. Nathaniel ordered stew, and Zoe sat across from him, the sunlight catching her hair and making it shine gold. You look beautiful today, he said softly. Zoe blushed, surprised. Thank you. I wanted to make a good impression. You already have, he said. Before she could reply, a shadow fell across their table. Sheriff Tom Blackwood stood there, hat in hand, his face serious. Reed, he said quietly, I was hoping to catch you. Got a message from up near Helena. Someone's asking about a young woman who sounds a lot like your wife. Nathaniel felt Zoe freeze across from him, who, he asked, keeping his voice calm, claims to be her guardian, the sheriff said. Says she ran away from Boston. He's been offering money for anyone who helps find her. Zoe's hands trembled around her cup. He's found me, she whispered. The sheriff looked between them, his expressions softening. If she's here of her own free will, she's safe as far as I'm concerned. But Reed, if I were you, I'd make things official. Men like that don't give up easy. Quote. When the sheriff left, the small restaurant felt too quiet. Zoe's voice shook as she said, if we were truly married, he couldn't take me back. Nathaniel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. We'll do it when you're ready, Zoe, not because of fear, but because you choose it. Zoe nodded, though her eyes were distant. I just want this to end. They left town quickly, the weight of the sheriff's warning following them home. For weeks afterward, Nathaniel kept his rifle close and his eyes open for strangers. But no one came. The mountains stood silent, and the days passed in peace. By late August, the fear had faded. The air cooled, and the leaves began to turn gold. Nathaniel and Zoe worked side by side preparing for winter. Their laughter returned, and with it something deeper, something tender. One evening, as the sky burned orange with sunset, Zoe sat beside him on the porch, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about us." Nathaniel's heart thudded. "What about us?" Zoe turned to him, her eyes steady. "When I came here, I was broken. I didn't trust anyone, but you changed that. You gave me peace when I didn't think I deserved it. I care for you more than I ever thought I could care for anyone again." Nathaniel's throat went dry. "Zoe, I want to be your wife," she said simply, "truly your wife." For a moment, Nathaniel couldn't speak. Then he reached for her hand, rough fingers closing over her smaller ones. "I care for you too," he said, "more than I know how to say. If you're sure, we'll do it." "I'm sure," she whispered. They were married the next morning in the small church in Silverdale. Only the sheriff and the pastor stood as witnesses. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just two people who had found each other in the wild heart of the West. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel kissed her gently, and Zoe smiled against his lips. "I think I finally know what home feels like," she said. The months that followed were filled with a quiet joy Nathaniel had never known. They worked together through the fall, harvesting, preparing, laughing. Zoe's laughter came easily now, and sometimes Nathaniel would stop working just to listen to it. Then, one cold morning in October, Zoe told him she was expecting. Nathaniel froze, staring at her, then broke into a grin that reached his eyes. "A baby?" Quote. She nodded, her smile soft. "A baby?" He pulled her close, holding her tight against him. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted," he whispered. Through winter, the snow came heavy, locking them away from the world. They didn't mind. They built a life inside those walls, a life full of warmth and laughter. Nathaniel made her tea every morning. Zoe read aloud by the fire every night. The baby grew strong beneath her heart, and Nathaniel often knelt beside her, listening for the small flutter of movement. By spring, the thaw had come, and so had the child. The night was long, filled with pain and prayer, but when dawn broke, Nathaniel held his daughter for the first time. Tiny, perfect, and fierce with her mother's eyes and his chin. "Amelia," Zoe whispered. After my mother, Nathaniel looked at his wife and their newborn child, tears filling his eyes. "Amelia Reed," he said softly, "welcome home." Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the Montana mountains, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around Zoe and the baby, his voice rough with emotion. "You're not alone now." He whispered again the words that had started it all, "not ever again." Years later, when fields were full and their children played in the garden, Nathaniel sometimes thought back to that dusty day in Silverdale. The day a frightened woman stepped off a stagecoach and changed everything. In a land known for loneliness and hardship, they had found something rare, not just survival, but love, family, and peace. And every night when the stars spread across the Montana sky, Nathaniel would whisper the same promise he'd made that first day, one that had never been broken: "We're not alone now, not ever again."